Okay, so I have the great fortune to have Bartholomew Broadbent with me today. We're actually having an event at the house of South African wines of Bartholomew's, but I actually asked Bartholomew if he would talk about Madeira.
Absolutely.
And one thing I will never forget that you told me years ago is you said, if I'm going to stay home, I have port, but if I'm going to go out, I have Madeira. And I have never forgotten that, and I kind of use it as a rule. There's something energizing about Madeira.
Absolutely.
What is that?
Well, Madeira has an extremely high acidity, so it's really refreshing. And whereas port is more soporific, you go to sleep with port.
Okay.
Whereas Madeira is an enlivening wine. It really invigorates. And then the acidity is also very practical when it comes to food, because it's the best dessert wine of all for two reasons. One is the acidity allows it to be put with anything. You could even put it with balsamic vinegar. It won't be killed by that. But also Madeira, though it's a sweet wine, has a dry finish. Okay. So you can put it with sweet desserts without clashing with the sugar of a dessert.
Okay.
Beyond that, Madeira is the most American wine you'll ever come across.
Really?
And especially, we're actually filming here in Baltimore, which is a very historic area for Madeira.
Absolutely.
And but all across during the colonial era, Madeira was the biggest selling wine in America, up until Prohibition, when 95% of Madeira was sold in America. But then Prohibition wiped out their market, and they had to rip out vines and plant other crops like bananas and whatever.
Okay.
But Madeira came to be because of shipping to America. Madeira is an island. It belongs to Portugal, but it's directly in the trade winds between Europe and America. And all the boats used to stop off in Madeira to pick up provisions. And they used to use the barrels of Madeira as ballast in the bottom of the boats.
Okay.
So one day, one of these ships arrived in Savannah or wherever it's going, maybe Boston or Baltimore, wherever, and forgot to unload the cargo of Madeira.
Okay.
And it returned to the island where they tasted it, and they found out that having crossed the oceans twice, it had been heated in the holds of the ships and had changed the wine and improved it. So for many years there was a law you couldn't sell any Madeira till it had been shipped around the world twice.
Okay.
But then also, so for a while there was a law you couldn't sell any Madeira until it had been shipped around the world twice, but that's slightly impractical these days. But we still simulate the voyage of shipping to America by heating the wine. So a minimum of 3 months is required to convert the wine, whether it's red or white wine, into Madeira.
Okay.
The other reason it's a very American drink is because it was the favorite wine of the colonial days of the founding fathers. George Washington drank a pint of Madeira every day for dinner.
Oh my gosh.
Jefferson loved Madeira. Betsy Ross, when she was saying the flag, she had a side table with Madeira on it. And it was by far the biggest selling wine in America.
Wow. So it started as just a still wine in the ballast, but now it's higher alcohol. Is there alcohol added at this point?
To give George Washington a little bit of credit, when he was drinking a pint a day, it was a still wine.
Okay.
Today we fortify the wine, just like port, by adding brandy to the wine, and we do this during fermentation by adding the brandy before all the sugar has been converted into alcohol. And funny little kids running around screaming their heads off, but need to give them a glass of Madeira.
Or maybe port.
Port, yeah. I've forgotten what we're talking about.
We were talking about the addition of alcohol.
Yeah, so the Madeira, during fermentation, when the sugar has been converted into alcohol, we'll add the brandy to the wine before all the fermentation stops, before all the sugar has been converted. So there's a residual sugar, but the wine is 19% alcohol.
Right. So it's not super high.
Not super high. No, it's basically a
dessert wine. But
when you look at some of the wines from California, at 15 to 16% alcohol,
exactly.
It's not much.
Exactly.
In fact, those wines are higher than sherry.
So tell me about this.
So Broadbent is our own.
Today.
This is the Broadbent Colheita, 1996. Broadbent, obviously my brand, and Colheita is the Portuguese word for vintage.
Okay.
To make a vintage Madeira, It has to be 20 years old before we can sell it.
Okay.
So Colheita is a vintage dated wine that's released before 20 years of age.
Oh,
so
okay.
somewhere between 5 and 20 years of age, we
Okay.
sell it as Colheita.
Okay, so if this were older than 20 years, it would just be the vintage year, but without the word Colheita.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we wouldn't actually put vintage, vintage, the word vintage in English
Right, exactly.
wouldn't even appear
it would
on
just
the label.
be the year.
Yeah,
Okay.
because the port shippers have trademarked the word vintage for Portugal.
Okay. Tell me why it's tradition to make the labels of Madeira painted as opposed to paper.
So we stencil these bottles because historically, when the wines were being heated and cooled, and the glues weren't very good those days,
Okay.
and the humidity would disintegrate paper labels. So nowadays we bottle it when we're ready to ship it. We don't heat it once it's in
Right,
the bottle, but
right.
it's still traditional to
Right.
do it like that.
But isn't it also true that I mean, this once I open this, it's not going to go bad, right?
Yeah, people say, how long can you keep a bottle of Madeira open? In our house, it's about 10 minutes and
Right,
we
right.
open the next. But
Mine too.
No, technically, that's another great thing about Madeira. You open this bottle and it never goes off. You could keep it in the trunk of your car all summer long. It's not going to harm it. Because Madeira is totally oxidized
Right.
already, so it's not going to be
Because you've
harmed.
already heated it and
Yeah.
kind of ruined it, essentially.
Yeah, but that's what creates Madeira.
exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. So let's taste.
Yes.
Taste.
Look at the color
something.
first, because the
The color is gorgeous. It's like
the
toffee.
hallmark of Madeira, when people say, how can you tell the difference between Tawny Port, Sherry and Madeira
Okay.
just by looking at the color?
Okay.
I look for that green amber rim.
Okay.
And that's a sign of a very good quality from Madeira. The only other wine that gives that green tinge is very old brown Rieslings.
Okay.
On the nose,
Interesting.
what you're looking for is that acidity that immediately makes your mouth water. And
Yeah, it doesn't have the more cloying sweetness of a tawny. There is this kind of bracing
and then
quality.
it also, that acidity clears your nasal passages, a bit like Vicks.
Yes, yes.
Who gets Vicks when you can just smell
Right.
it? And it's got caramelly flavors and smells, and you can maybe come up with some other
Orange peel. And,
yeah,
I mean,
orange
there's a lot
peel
of
is a good one.
citrus kind
Yes,
of qualities
absolutely.
going on.
And then on the palate, it's God. There's so much going on in that.
Oh my gosh.
Fills the mouth, fills the nasal passages. It fills your mouth with flavour. It's got a sort of almost a syrupy, but light syrup. Like imagine maple syrup texture, but not as cloying and not as thick.
Yes,
just
exactly.
that sort of explosion in the mouth.
Exactly. We had some salted caramel ice cream earlier. It's kind of reminded
Would
me
be-
of that.
absolutely.
But it's so racy at the same time. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what's amazing about it. It's like I'm drinking a, crazy racy
Yeah.
acidic beautiful wine, but it has this nutty toffee quality underneath.
And you know
which is
how
amazing.
when you see something and it raises the hair on the back of your neck?
Yes.
Well, this is doing the equivalent inside your mouth.
You're
It's
right.
sort of,
You're absolutely right. It's just lovely.
yeah.
Well, thank you
Cheers to that.
so much. This is a real treat.